He's dismissing everybody, it looks like, from the room. The president covering a lot of ground there in his conversation, or his Q&A, I should say, as he's there across from the leader of Argentina, everything from the government shutdown to the peace plan, that ceasefire deal in the Middle East, less than 24 hours after the return of those 20 living hostages from Hamas, the exchange, of course, of those Palestinian prisoners returning now to Gaza, and some serious questions about the road ahead. You also heard him talk about the Pentagon press access policy. We'll get into that in just a second with our senior White House correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez. And, Gabe, let's start with the Middle East news here, because the president, even when pressed, has declined to put a deadline now on when Hamas must disarm. This is one of the critical pieces of this ceasefire plan, this peace deal moving forward, one that the president is taking credit for. He did help broker that deal. And yet, while he says that we will disarm Hamas, he says we will disarm Hamas if they don't disarm themselves quickly and violently, he declined to get more specific than that, other than saying in a reasonable period of time.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. Look, the president coming off his victory lap yesterday in the Middle East, today being pressed for some of those details, right, of what happens next in this entire peace process. Of course, Hamas not returning the agreed upon number of bodies of hostages, although 20 living hostages were let go. So now that is creating questions about how that process moves forward. Hamas saying that there was so much destruction in Gaza that some of those bodies cannot be easily retrieved. But yes, as you said, Hallie, the president saying they will disarm, referring to Hamas, and at one point seeming to suggest that he had even spoken directly with Hamas, although there was a follow-up question where he then said that some of his top leadership were the ones that had spoken with Hamas, and bluntly saying if they don't disarm, we will disarm them, perhaps saying in the starkest terms, a bit of a threat to Hamas, that if they don't follow through with the president's 20-point plan, that there could be trouble ahead. But for now, the president still trying to make the case that this is a historic peace agreement and that no one else but him could have accomplished it, Hallie.
He also addressed the government shutdown, indicating that he is, there's not a huge level of urgency, Gabe, let's call it, for the shutdown to end here, as the president, as he has done, frequently placed the blame on Democrats. Democrats put that blame right back on Republicans. He said something interesting. He said a private donor, a very wealthy person, as he said, is going to cover the shortfall for military members' paychecks moving forward, Gabe. We don't know who that is, right?
We don't, and it was interesting what the president said there. He had said that he hadn't said it in as stark of terms, although he has, for the past several days, been threatening Democrats with closing up programs that were favored by Democrats. So that part wasn't necessarily new, but what did strike me, Hallie, is the president seemed very comfortable in a way, bringing up that military members will be paid. However, suggesting that it was Democrat programs that would feel the pain from this.
That's right.
So he didn't really seem to be in any huge hurry here to negotiate in the short term, given the fact that, in his view, Republican priorities and also military members being paid didn't seem to be on the chopping block at this point. And so he was ramping up the pressure there on Democrats to either come to the table, or he seemed very comfortable in letting this shutdown continue, Hallie.
And speaking of the military, Gabe, it's worth noting that we heard from the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, who addressed this extraordinarily controversial new press policy that goes into effect just hours from now, suggesting, as Pete Hegseth said, he was proud of that policy that restricts access to the Pentagon. Gabe, we should note, obviously, that NBC News is among the many news organizations that has signed a pledge to not sign on to that because of concerns, of course, over what that policy would do, essentially require journalists to get permission of what they publish in so many words from the Pentagon.
Right. And Hallie, it was interesting the president asked directly about that there with the defense secretary sitting right next to him. The administration has tried to highlight certain parts of those new restrictions, and that include, wearing a badge at all times and not being allowed to go into certain places in the Pentagon. It should be noted, Hallie, we are not allowed here at the White House to just travel any place we can, and we're also required to have badge access. However, what the president and the defense secretary did not mention is some of the more controversial parts of that policy, and indeed what has troubled many news organizations is this idea that reporters must get authorization before publishing any type of information that is not authorized, even though it may be unclassified. And of course, that is drawing pushback from many of these media organizations. The president not responding to that specifically, but I have spoken with White House officials here that they do support what the Pentagon has been doing in what they view as it relates to national security. But certainly that is a debate that will continue, Hallie.
And we should note that even conservative-leaning organizations, including Newsmax, have said they will not sign that. Gabe, in the 30 seconds we have left, important to note here why he was in that room in the first place, and that is to have that discussion with the Argentinian president as this American rescue plan, essentially, the so-called bailout, is underway.
Right. Yeah, $20 billion in a currency swap that the administration is now doing with Argentina. Argentina's president, a close ally of President Trump. At one point, he's called him his favorite president, Trump has said, of the Argentinian leader. However, there has been controversy because some critics, Democrats, and some American farmers have complained that China is now buying soybeans from Argentina instead of American farmers. The president brushing up that criticism today, saying it was very important to have a good relationship with Argentina, Hallie.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.